All right. So we are on section 3 of chapter 5, where Ramona is having this birthday party that wasn't quite planned. I guess they'll have to. Mother took the applesauce out of the refrigerator. If we put a couple of sheets down for them to sit on, maybe they won't get applesauce on the rug. The parade trampered down the attic stairs and through the kitchen. But Mother, said Beezus, when the drum and the horns had disappeared into the basement again, the only napkins I can find are the St. Valentine's Day and Halloween. They won't do. They'll have to do, said Mother. Beezus spread 2 sheets in the middle of the living room floor. Then she went into the kitchen to help her mother, who was tearing open 3 boxes of Fig Newtons. It's a good thing I bought these on the sale last week, she remarked. Are we going to give them them lemonade or anything to drink? Beezus asked. Not on my living room rug. Mother rapidly spooned applesauce into the dishes. Applesauce and Fig Newtons are bad enough. Maybe if we feed them right away, some of them will think that the party is over and go home. Beezus piled Fig Newtons on 2 plates. I hope so. This many small children in the house on a rainy day is too much. The parade scampered across the attic floor again, and Mother had to raise her voice to make herself heard. It sounds as if they were coming through the ceiling. They'd catch them the next day. They'd come through the kitchen and hand out the 1 applesauce. Beezus shouted back. Then maybe we could get them to march into the living room. It was not long before Howie led the parade into the kitchen again. He stopped so suddenly that the children bumped into one another. When do we eat? He demanded. Now. Beezus thrust a dish of applesauce and a spoon in her hands. I want some, cried the others. Mother handed a second child some applesauce. Forward march, she ordered. Beezus led Howie into the living room, and the rest of the parade followed with the applesauce. You sit there, she said to Howie, pointed to the place on the sheet. She was relieved to see the others seat themselves around the edge of the sheet. Quickly, she handed around the paper napkins. I want one with witches on it, demanded a boy who had a Valentine napkin. I want one with hearts on it, wailed a girl who had a Halloween napkin. Beezus hastily counted the napkins. Yes, there are enough of each kind to go around. 2 napkins apiece would be safer anyway. She handed each child a second napkin, and they all began to eat their applesauce, except one little girl who didn't like applesauce. Ramona was beaming because refreshments were the most important part of any party, and now at last her guests were behaving the way she wanted them to. Mother came out of the kitchen with the plates of the Fig Newtons, which she handed to Beezus. Here, pass these around, she said. I think I'd better help with Willa Jean. Willa Jean knew how to eat with a spoon. The trouble was that she had to pick up the food with her left hand and put it into the spoon, which she held in her right hand. Then, most of the time, she was able to get it into her mouth. Most of the time. Ramona, her face shining with a happiness, looked at her friends, sharing the applesauce. Those cookies are filled with worms, chopped up worms, she gleefully told everyone. Why, Ramona! Beezus was shocked. They aren't either. They're filled with ground up figs. You know that. Ramona did not answer. Her mouth was full of Fig Newtons. Beezus passed the last plate to a boy named Joey. I don't like worms, he said. I don't like worms, said the next little girl who had applesauce all over her chin. Beezus noticed that Ramona was beginning to scowl. When Howie refused a cookie, it was too much for Ramona. You eat that, she shouted. I won't, yelled Howie. You make me. Ramona jumped up and spilled her applesauce on the sheet. She thrust a nibbled Fig Newton at Howie. You eat that, she repeated as she stepped into the applesauce It's my party and I want you to eat it. Howie knocked the cookie out of her hand. Ramona grabbed a handful of the fig Newtons and thrusted them at Susan. Eat these, she shouted. Susan began to cry. They're full of worms, she sobbed. I don't like worms. They're pretend worms, yelled Ramona. No, they're not, cried Susan. They're real. You eat these, Ramona yelled, thrusting her handfuls of cookies at the children who backed away. Ramona stomped on her feet and screamed. Then she threw the fig Newtons at her guests as hard as she could. My mother won't let me eat worms, shouted a little boy. Ramona threw herself at the floor and kicked. Ramona, stop that! Mother appeared from the kitchen with Willa Jean balanced on one hip. She grabbed Ramona by one arm and tried to drag her to her feet, but Ramona's legs were like rubber. All right, Howie, forward march, Beezus ordered, hoping to draw attention from Ramona. No one moved. It was much more fun to see what was going to happen to Ramona. This is my party. They're supposed to eat refreshments, Ramona howled, banging her heels on the floor. Ramona, you're acting like a 2-year-old. You may go to your room and close the door until you can behave yourself, said Mother quickly. Ramona kicked harder to show that she was not going to mind unless she felt like it. Ramona, said Mother even more quietly, don't make me count to 10. Gasping with sobs, Ramona got up from the floor and ran into the bedroom, where she slammed the door as hard as she could. All right, parade, said Mother wearily. Forward march. Up and down, whistling, banging, tooting, marched the parade. Mother sat Willa Jean down and was just beginning to gather up the dishes and sheets when a car stopped in front of the house and Mrs. Kemp got out. At last, sighed Mother, hurrying to the door. I've come for Howie and Willa Jean, said Mrs. Kemp, as several other cars stopped in front of the Quimbys. The parade marched into the living room. I don't want to go home, protested Howie when he saw his mother. The party must have been a success, Mrs. Kemp ordered. It certainly was. Mother tried to push a uncurled side of her hair behind her ear to the smooth out of her rumpled old dress. I like to play parade, said Howie, but I didn't like the way we had to eat. Why, Howie, scolded Miss Kemp, we must remember our manners. Ramona, her face streaked with tears, came out of the room and stood staring unhappily at her departing guest, who the last child was, who had struggled into his boots. She looked tearfully at her mother. I'm behaving myself now, she said meekly. Mother dropped wearily into her chair. Ramona, if you want a party, why don't you ask me to have one? Because when I asked you don't let me do things, explained Ramona, sniffling. Beezus couldn't help feeling there was some truth in Ramona's remark. She had often felt that way herself, especially when she was younger. Mother, did I do things like Ramona when I was 4? She asked. You did some of the things Ramona does now, said Mother thoughtfully, but you were really very different. You were quieter for one thing. This pleased Beezus. One of the reasons she sometimes disliked Ramona was that she was never quiet when she could manage to be noisy. Of course, there were some things that all 4-year-olds do, Mother continued, but even sisters are usually different, just the way your Aunt Beatrice and I were different. When we were girls, I was a bookworm and went to the library 2 or 3 times a week. She was the best hopscotch player and the fastest rope jumper in the neighborhood, and she was better at jacks than anybody in the whole school. That surprised Beezus. She had never thought that her mother and her aunt and children as before. She tried to picture her school teacher, Aunt Jumpin', jump rope, and found to her surprise that it was very hard to do. Of course, Mother and Aunt Beatrice must have been very different when they were girls, because they were so different now that they were grown up, and she was glad that they were different. She loved them both. Did I have tantrums too? Beezus asked. Once in a while, said Mother. I always dreaded cutting your fingernails because you kicked and screamed. Beezus could not help feeling silly. Imagine having a tantrum over a little thing like having your fingernails cut. Then Ramona spoke up. I don't cry when you cut my fingernails, she boasted. Yes, but you scream when you have your hair washed. Beezus could not help reminding her. Ramona, said Mother, you were a very naughty girl this afternoon. What are we going to do with you? Ramona stopped sniffing and looked interested. Lock me in the closet for 1,000,000 years? She suggested cheerfully. Mother and Beezus exchanged glances. How quickly Ramona recovered. Make me sleep outdoors in the rain? Obviously, Ramona was enjoying herself. Not let me have anything to eat but carrots? Mother laughed and looked at Beezus. I'm afraid all we can do is wait for her to grow up, she said. And when Mother said we like that, Beezus always felt sorry for Ramona because she would have to wait such a long time to be a grown-up.